Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our first webinar of, what's it, 2024? Where did that go? So, hope everybody's well. Hope you've had a good start to the year. The sun is shining. It's a good day today. So, what are we going to be talking about today? The 11 directories prospective clients might use to find a financial advisor or planner, people like you. So, the directories people might use to find people like you. And more specifically today, we're going to start by talking about the big three directories. We're then going to talk about some of the directories you might not already know about. And then we're going to talk about some of the mistakes that advisors and planners make when it comes to directories. We've got a lot to get through today. There's going to be really practical stuff for you guys to do when you follow up this email. Abby's got a follow-up email to write to you after the webinar with the recording that has got more links in it than you can shake a stick at. So really practical stuff today. Dan, do you just want to talk about housekeeping for anybody that hasn't already been on one of our webinars before?
Yes, please. Hello, I'm Dan, the head of branding and design here at Yardstick. And I suppose I better quickly run through some of these house rules before we all get blown away by Storm Jocelyn. But before I do that, it's good to be back for another year, packed full of webinars. We've got some really exciting stuff coming up over the next few months. Kicked off today with a deep dive into directories. So what do you need to know? First of all, we are recording this session, so don't worry if you miss anything. A follow-up email with a link to the video, plus any notes, resources, or links we mention will be landing in your inbox later on. And secondly, this is a safe space for us all, not only from 97-mile-per-hour winds, but also from judgment. So get those questions in, because there's no such thing as a silly one. If you're thinking it, so is somebody else. So use the Q&A box or the chat function to get those questions and comments in. We're going to answer them as we go today, and time permitting, we'll sweep up any stragglers at the end. As always, Abby will be in the background, working hard as ever, answering any of the techie questions directly. So you set them up and she'll knock them down. And looking at the attendees list today, we've got plenty of familiar names in the attendees list. So you're going to know that these sessions work really well with plenty of engagement. So question us, agree with us, or tell us that we're speaking complete rubbish. It'll mean we all get the most out of the hour today. So without further ado, Phil, what directories are out there and how can we make the most of them?
Yes, Dan. Funny you should ask. Shall we start? The other thing that we're going to have today is some polls. We've got 3 polls at different points in the presentation. I'd really like it if everybody could vote on those polls. That would be great. So let's look at a bit of background about directories. So what are they? What are they not? So directories of financial advisors are not a shortcut to success. There's no magic bullet. There's no guarantee that they're all going to work. There's no guarantee if you are on one directory and not on the others that you are suddenly going to exponentially grow your business. They're not a shortcut to success. They're also not, as I think we might prove today, sometimes known about. So there are some directories that many of the people on this call might not know about. There are some directories that are not particularly well understood, and hopefully today we'll deal with a few myths and misconceptions. Also, directories are not a replacement for a recommendation strategy. As we've said numerous times, referrals and recommendations from existing clients are the best type of new inquiry. They've got the highest conversion rate and the lowest cost of acquisition. So directories don't replace a referral and recommendation strategy. And they don't work particularly well. Put it better, a different way. They work better if you have a broader and impressive online presence. Because everybody who gets in touch with you takes a digital journey to your door. So if a prospect finds you on a directory, they might immediately get in touch. But you know what? If they find you on a directory, they might find others as well. And that's the point where competition happens. And they might find firm A, firm B, don't know who to get in touch with, not enough information on the directory, and then they start Googling. They start running brand searches. They look you up online, they look at Google reviews, they look at voucher reviews, they go to your website, they form an impression. And as we've said before, sat between someone becoming aware of you and taking action is Google. And someone might become aware of you on a directory, but then they Google you. So we need to have that broader and impressive online presence to really support the directories that we're going to be talking about today. So that's what directories aren't. Directories also, though, need to be understood. We're going to deal with some myths and misconceptions today. They need to be tracked and monitored. I saw a post on LinkedIn yesterday about unbiased. And the crux of the question was essentially, how do other people find unbiased? And my view is too many people in the past, from other things that I've seen in the past, make decisions based on gut feel when it comes to unbiased rather than data. So directories need to be tracked and monitored, and they need to be part of a wider marketing strategy. You can't just go on one to these directories and expect it to work. So that's a bit of background about what directories are and what they're not. Also, what makes a successful directory? I thought it was worth a quick slide on that. The barriers to entry in the directory market are huge. I've had a few people come to Yardstick and say, do we intend to launch our own directory of financial advisors? And the answer is absolutely not. The barriers to entry are absolutely massive. And that's because directories need to be promoted to consumers. You need that consumer traffic on directories to make them work. And as we'll see through some of these directories, there's not a lot of promotion of them going on. Also, directories need buy-in from the advisor and the planning community. You need two groups of people on these directories. You need advisors to make them useful to consumers, and you need consumers to make directories useful to advisors and planners. And then you need a financial model that works for both the directory, unless it's a charity, although it's still got bills to pay. You need a financial model that works for the directory and advisors who are on there. And we've seen with some of the directories how difficult that can be to get the financial model right. So it's those three things that make a successful directory. We need consumers using it, we need advisors and planners buying into it, and we need a financial model that works. So a bit of background and hopefully some useful context about why actually life is pretty hard if you run directories. I've got a lot of sympathy for firms who run directories. So we're going to start with a poll before we go into the 11 directories that we're going to talk about. Now, Dan, let's see if this works. So that's my reminder to put the poll up. Dan, could you put the first poll up about unbiased, if that's okay? And can everybody go and vote, please?
Right. Poll has been launched. Let's hope we have a successful first flight.
Can you see people voting, Dan?
Certainly can.
Excellent. You can give a running commentary if you like.
Oh, wow.
Although that might affect the results.
Yeah.
Maybe don't do the running commentary. Yeah. Keep it open for another 10 seconds. How are we doing, Dan? Can we see the votes?
Yes. So the question is obviously, thinking about unbiased over the last 12 months, do you feel? And the answers are more positive, more negative, the same, or non-applicable because you don't use unbiased. So we've got most people have voted now. So let's close the poll. And the most common answer is non-applicable because they don't use unbiased with 44%. The second most popular answer is more negative with 38%. 15% of people say the same, and only 4% of people are more positive.
So quick maths from me, really rough maths, and that's about 60% of people who use unbiased feel more negative. Interesting. Okay. Watch this space for more polls as we work through. Okay, so unbiased. Each of these slides will have a bit of the basics, a bit of the lowdown of what we think, and then our advice. So unbiased. I doubt there's anybody on this webinar who hasn't heard of unbiased. And it's the oldest and largest of all the directories. open to advisors, planners, and mortgage brokers. And there's essentially two ways that consumers can use the directory. The first thing they can do is that they can browse the directory. So if anybody is as old as I am, they'll remember when Unbiased was IFA Promotions. And IFA Promotions was essentially just a directory. So you would browse, the consumer would browse and would make a decision about which advisor or planner to contact. And they've still got that option on there. But a few years ago, maybe 6, 7 years ago, the Unbiased introduced the ability to be matched. So the consumer would answer some basic questions. Voucher's algorithm would push that out to a number of advisors. I've heard different numbers between about 3 and 7. And the first advisor to accept that inquiry locked everybody out. So that's the matching route. And if you put yourselves in the shoes of the consumer and go on to the Unbiased website, you'll see that actually the UX, the user journey, is pushing people down the matched route. So we have, there's two ways of consumers being able to get in touch with advisors: browse the directory the old way, and being matched the relatively new way, albeit it's 6, 7 years old now. And in terms of the pricing model, Unbiased pricing now, you have a monthly subscription plus a payment per accepted inquiry. So when the inquiry comes through, you don't have to accept it, you can decline it. It's good practice on Unbiased to give them a definitive answer, yes or no. And if you buy it, you have the payment per inquiry. And in terms of payments, you can see here, this is just information taken from the Unbiased website. There was a couple of changes last year, as I understand it, with Unbiased. And you have the monthly subscription on standard, premium, or enhanced. And that gets you 5, 20, or 50 locations, locations being postcode locations. And that allows you, clearly, if you want premium, to have more locations, wider coverage. Wider coverage means potentially more inquiries. You've got the lead cost on top. So up to 50,000 of investable assets, £52. 150 to 250, 125, 1.5 million and above 276. And there's some tiers in the middle. It would have been a big slide if I'd have put them all on. So there's some tiers in the middle. And they require a 6 monthly commitment as well from you, six months contract. Its purpose, Unbiased sole purpose, in my view, is lead generation. In my opinion, really happy to be told I'm wrong. But in my opinion, this is very simply, how much am I paying out versus how much am I getting in? And clearly there's really 3 sources of income from a client: initial fees, ongoing fees, capitalized over a reasonable period of time, and who knows, potential increase in sale value. But for me, this is very straightforward. Unbiased utility is lead gen. We need to be comparing what comes in with what goes out. Now, it can work well if you are taking multiple locations. For me, for Unbiased to work, you have to take multiple locations. This is a numbers game in many ways. Your processes need to be effective as well to win the inquiry in the first place, and then to follow up effectively, make sure that people are put into your sales funnel so that you stand as much chance as converting the lead as possible. We also need to make sure that results are monitored. As we said before, return on investment is massively important on Unbiased, and therefore you need to monitor your returns. Every inquiry that comes into your business should be recorded anyway, for reasons we've spoken about in the past. So monitor the inquiries that come in, monitor the returns that you're getting. And it can work well for firms targeting lower value clients. I am absolutely not saying higher value clients aren't on there, but the cost of those leads is quite expensive. So our advice when it comes to Unbiased is consider it, no stronger than that, but consider it if you will monitor the results you're getting so that you're making decisions based on evidence rather than gut feel. It can work well if you have a large lead requirement. If your business has a relatively large lead requirement, unbiased can work well, but you need significantly more locations than firms who have got a smaller lead requirement. You've got to be able to commit the budget. Yeah, we've already seen that the budget is quite chunky. And it doesn't replace that fully costed marketing strategy. I also think it's useful, can be useful for new start firms. So new start firms clearly, with fewer clients, are going to get fewer referrals and recommendations from those clients. So it can work quite nicely for new start firms, but with all those caveats. Now, what we're going to do in terms of questions, as Dan said, we're going to take questions about each directory as we work through, and then we'll do any general questions at the end. So Dan, have we got any comments or questions about unbiased?
Questions, no. Comments, absolutely. And the overwhelming theme is people used to use unbiased and no longer do for varying reasons. Pricing being a very common one. Other people unsure of how unbiased it actually is. Others have mentioned it feels more like they're selling Google ads at a premium. So an overwhelmingly cynical view of unbiased, and the overwhelming feel is that we used to use it and now we don't.
Okay, that's interesting. That Google ads at a premium is an interesting way of putting it. I've not heard that before. It's an interesting way of putting it. We couldn't start this presentation about directories without unbiased, so that was the logical reason for starting there. And I thank you for putting your comments in. I assume nobody else has got any more questions about unbiased or comments, so we will continue if that's okay, Dan.
Yeah, let's go.
So unbiased, I think we all know about. Right, poll time. Next place we're going to go before we get into the smaller, lesser known directories. We're going to talk about vouched for. So, Dan, do you want to launch the poll there, please?
I would love nothing more than to launch the poll.
We need some sort of countdown clock, don't we?
Oh, wow. There we go.
So if everybody could go and vote in that poll, please, as well. Thinking about vouched for over the last 12 months, do you feel more positive, more negative, the same, not applicable because you don't use vouched for? So really interested to see how the results compare.
While everyone's voting, we did have a comment in from Gavin who said that they couldn't see the poll. Now, it should pop up in front of you. If you're on multiple screens, Zoom's got this wonderful habit of putting it on the screen that you're not viewing Zoom on. So just check your other screens if that's the case, and hopefully you can catch it this time.
Thank you, Dan. So what have we got?
Okay, let's give it just a few more seconds for people to get their last minute votes in. Okay. So the question being, thinking about vouched for, over the last 12 months, do you feel? And then same answers apply, more positive, more negative, the same, or non-applicable because you don't use it. Again, the most common answer is non-applicable because we don't use it. The second most common answer is they feel the same with 25%. So non-applicable was 42%, the same is 25%. More positive has 20% just turned to 21% because another vote snuck through. And only 13% feel more negative about it.
Okay. So people are feeling more positive about vouched for than they are unbiased this time compared to this time last year. For those people who feel more negative about vouched for, be interested to understand why. Maybe put some comments in the chat. Be really interested to understand that. So vouched for. Clearly, it's the place to be. The directory sort of is second on our list, largely because of chronology and longevity. So vouched for was launched. Seems to me as broadly as a direct competitor to unbiased. It's open to all financial advisors, planners, and mortgage brokers. But over the years has pivoted towards a ratings and review platform. So I hear a lot of advisors say, don't get leads from vouched for. And that's a fair criticism maybe a few years ago. They might say they get more leads from unbiased. Again, might have been a fair criticism a few years ago. Now, though, vouched for me, it just does not equal unbiased. It is not the same thing as unbiased in any shape or form. It's a very different beast to unbiased. And that's because it's pivoted towards being a ratings and review platform. The ratings are for individual advisors, and they are aggregated to produce a firm score. So if you've got 5 advisors in your firm and they all are on vouched for, they will each have their own individual reviews on there. They are aggregated to form a score for your firm. And there are currently over 280,000 reviews on the platform, on vouched for. And they go to great lengths to make sure those reviews are genuine, so that advisors are getting reviews from genuine clients, and that causes less of a problem in terms of fake reviews, and also that advisors are actually putting all their reviews on there. So it's a good platform from that perspective. And its main focus, as I've said earlier, is to help firms show the value of financial planning, financial advice, mortgage advice, etc. But last year they introduced the Elevation product. And the Elevation product is very useful for helping you analyze the data within your vouched for reviews. So vouched for reviews have always been useful from a marketing perspective, but now the Elevation platform allows us to be able to, and enables firms to analyze those reviews more simply, more easily, and take decisions about their business, about their proposition, about the service, based on what clients have said. Big fan of Elevation. And from a consumer perspective, consumers can search the directory. So there's no best match, as there is with unbiased. Consumers can search the directory based on postcode, specialisms, etc. And then the results show up in a list, and the list is defined by vouched for's algorithm, which is based on factors such as number of reviews, quality of reviews, recency of reviews, how recently you got the reviews. And then at the top, there's a feature box for best match. Now, you can't pay to go in the best match box. That's based on vouched for's algorithm. And clearly we don't know what the weighting is between number of reviews, quality and recency. But what is pretty clear to me is that those advisors who have the best reviews and the most recent reviews tend to be higher up the list. So from a subscription perspective, vouched for is £54 a month per advisor plus VAT. And then there's Elevation on top if you want it. You can't have Elevation without verified vouched for membership, as I understand it, but you can have the verified membership on its own. And that verified membership means that you appear in searches, means you can use the widgets on the website, etc. From our perspective, it's primary social proof. It's primarily there for social proof, showing the value of working with you. And as we'll see in a minute, it's the ideal partner platform to Google reviews. It will produce leads. It will produce inquiries. Broadly speaking, in our experience, it tends to wash its face in terms of subscription costs. But its primary focus is showcasing the value that you add to your clients. And they do that through a variety of different ways, with the widgets that can be embedded on the website, the top rated guide, which is out in March, and then they're publishing it again in the Mail and the Telegraph later on in the year. And there's a bunch of other supporting assets as well that can be tremendously useful, especially when you're trying to engage with new prospects. So if you take nothing else out of today's webinar, take this. It's that vouched for does no longer equal unbiased. And our view, our advice, is that almost all firms should use vouched for a partner review platform to Google. A couple of reasons for this. And Abby, if we put in the follow-up notes, a definitive guide to online reviews, anybody who wants to read more can do. But for my money, 2 platforms that you should be collecting reviews on, Google and vouched for. First reason, Google's quite hard to get reviews on. It's important, you should be using it, but Google's quite hard to get reviews. Therefore, if you don't offer a second platform, you're sending your clients down a dead end. And in our experience, for every review you get on Google, you'll get between 5 and 10 on vouched for. And then the second reason, if somebody has searched for you online, run a brand search, remember Google sitting between awareness and action, there's no guarantee they're going to search for your name. They might search for an individual advisor's name. There's no guarantee they're going to search for your firm name. They might search for an individual advisor's name. If they search for your firm name, your Google reviews will come up. If they search for the individual advisor's name, the vouch for reviews will come up on a Google search. So for me, for my money, almost every single firm should be using vouched for and Google to collect online reviews. Dan, I'm going to pause. I can see some things coming in. So where do you want to start?
Right. So in terms of comments and questions, mostly comments, but we do have a few questions. So we'll begin with the questions if that's okay. So first question is in from Ian, who asks, does vouched for have a tipping point as to the number of reviews needed to be credible? I ask as my firm is consciously small with a modest number of larger clients, so I will never get loads of reviews. Would 25 star be as powerful as 150 4.8 star?
I don't know is the answer to that question. Where that specific point and those specific maths, the short answer is I don't know. What I would say though is we tend to turn on, so we tend to take a free voucher for profile for firms. When they get to maybe a dozen reviews, at that point, we tend to say, right, turn on the verified membership and you can start embedding the widget into your website using the widgets in your email footers, start to market it on social media, etc. So from a platform perspective, Ian, and where you might rank, the answer is I don't know. From a marketing perspective and using voucher as a platform to showcase your reviews, I would say once you've got a dozen reviews or so, which is relatively straightforward to do, because remember, husband and wife can leave a review each. Your prospects can leave first impression reviews. Existing clients can leave top-up reviews. Getting a dozen reviews is pretty straightforward. So second half of the question, don't know. First half of the question, yes, and it's about 12.
Fantastic. Let's go to Jack's comment now. So Jack says, we go down a road of just Google only. Not sure it's worth doing vouched for in conjunction with Google.
I'd be interested to understand. I could sit here for hours and say, yes, it is, and explain why. But I'd be interested to understand why, quote unquote, it's not worth going down the second platform. I'd be interested to understand the logic for that. So if we could explain the logic, then I'll deal with that then.
Brilliant. Let's go to, and Jack caveats that with, because vouched for is just Google, but at cost.
Disagree, it's not. Google is reviews for firms. Voucher is reviews for advisors. Google, they're displayed on the Google My Business listing. You can embed them in your website if you want. Vouch for, there's a whole load of ways of embedding them in the website, and there's a whole load of ancillary benefits, time stop rated guide, etc., etc. Vouch for will produce some leads. Google won't. For every one review you get on Google, you'll get 5 to 10 on vouch for. I just don't think they're the same thing. I think they're very different products. I think they're complementary, not binary. Personal opinion only.
Brilliant. Let's move on to two questions in from Niall, who says, first of all, is vouched for applicable to Ireland because they're based in Dublin?
No.
And then, sorry, I think I overspoke you there. Would you say?
No, they're not. It's not. Yeah, it's not in Ireland.
And then Niall's second question is, we use Trustpilot, and Niall asks whether we rate Trustpilot.
Yeah, so cheers, Niall. I think you've still got the logic of two platforms, Google plus a partner platform, because it's hard to leave reviews on Google. And therefore, the logic is you need that second platform. In the UK, for us, the logic is you use vouched for the reasons we've spoken about. Overseas from the UK perspective, then Trustpilot is the obvious next place to go. It's not the cheapest platform to embed on your website and get the widgets and that sort of stuff, but Trustpilot would be my go-to after vouched for. It's a bit country dependent. We were talking to a country on Monday where Trustpilot really doesn't seem to be a thing. But I could see why you'd use Trustpilot in Ireland now.
Okay, let's go to Sue's question now. So Sue says, it's hard enough to get clients to complete one review form, i.e. vouched for. How do we get them to fill in more than one, i.e. Google as well?
Great question, dead simple answer. So you send them one message by email or WhatsApp explaining we use two platforms. Here are the links, Google and vouched for. And some will do none and ignore you. Some will do both. Some will do one. But it isn't two separate emails. It's one email, two links, and that email or WhatsApp message should be wholly, exclusively, and only about the review request. We see some firms tagging the review request onto the end of, I don't know, a suitability report or the follow-up to a review meeting. And clients just not going to get there. They're not going to get to the end. Yeah. So one email, two links, that email, that message should be wholly, exclusively, and only about reviews. And if you get this right, you get your processes right, either as a kickoff project or as on an ongoing basis, you will see your reviews rise slowly each month. Abby, if you, again, just put that definitive guide in the follow-up, Suze does more information in there about how we do this. And this is based on our work with dozens of clients over the years who have been successful at collecting reviews.
Okay, before we move on, I will just give a very quick recap of the comments then. So as the poll results suggested, it's more balanced than people's views on unbiased. Now, we did ask for the negative voters to explain in a bit more detail. And ultimately, it comes from the feeling that it's more of a review platform than it is a lead generator. So we've got a few people giving a bit of context around that. In terms of other comments we've had, they're positive comments about vouched for, and many of them give the theme that the more you put into vouched for in terms of effort getting those reviews, the more inquiries it naturally generates. So there seems to be almost a tipping point of effort for that. But that's kind of it for the comments. Let's move on because I'm aware that we're just past the halfway point.
Yeah, we're good. Thank you, Dan. Right, so next, advisor book. So not got a poll for this one. But we're starting to move into the directory space where these are less well known. So we've done the two big ones. These are less well known, albeit, despite being the newest directory to the market, there is an argument that actually Advisor Book is potentially the most comprehensive because the guys at Advisor Book take a direct feed from the FCA's register. So there's a direct feed from the FCA register periodically into Advisor Book. Consumers, and by the way, I should have said, after this, Abby will be sending a link, or the follow-up email will have all the links into these directories. And where appropriate, we've not only included the consumer-facing link, but the advisor-facing link as well. So trying to make your life easy. But from this perspective, from Advisor Book's perspective, consumers can browse the directory based on postcode, and then they can narrow their choices down with various filters. Platform was launched just before COVID, maybe a little bit earlier. Updated in 2023, does look good. And there's new functionality been added in, so consumers can add reviews. I don't know how many reviews are on there, but they haven't gained the traction. It's a new feature, but they haven't gained the traction that vouched for reviews might have done. And firms where you've got multiple locations, offices in different regions or in different towns and cities, or with different advisors, can have multiple profiles on there as well. It's free, which makes it an interesting business model, and clearly might present challenges in terms of how widely the directory is promoted. For me, it's got better search filters on than unbiased as a consumer. It is, though, lower profile than vouched for or unbiased. And again, with a bit of money behind it, I think it could be a real challenger, certainly to unbiased. I'm a big fan of what Advisor Book are trying to do, and its comprehensive nature, and it looks good as well. From those two perspectives, I think it could be a challenger, certainly to unbiased. Now, after this presentation, your job is to go and claim and complete your profile. It's free. And the chances are your profile is on there already because it's pulling in from the FCA register. So go and complete your profile. Add your company logos, add your descriptions, add your images. They would do checks on your regulatory status and independent or restricted status. For me, it's free. I can't see there's anything to lose. It might generate 1 or 2 leads during the year because that's its main purpose right now. It also will help to pack out those search results for a brand search. So for me, Advisor Book could be a challenger to Unbiased. Go and claim and complete your profile. Dan, any questions about Advisor Book?
No.
Okay. Right, PFS, find an advisor. So, unsurprisingly, the PFS directory of advisors is only for advisors who are registered with a PFS. That's not going to come as a shock. This is a individual directory for individual advisors rather than firms. It's a postcode-based search for the consumer with some really basic filters around specialisms and pretty basic profiles as well. It's free. There's no charge for being on there. In my experience, though, advisors have rarely fully completed their profile, partly because I think might be relatively low profile as a directory, might have forgotten about it, might not have known it was there. And you often see missing information around website links, social media links, email addresses. Quite often you see where the business name should be the address. Some profiles need a little bit of love. And you can make updates by logging into the CII platform. So for me on here, if you are a member of the PFS, after this webinar, go check your profile, log in and complete any missing sections. I didn't want to name and shame any advisors today who weren't, but if you just go and do a postcode search or go and look at your own profile, there's just a lot of profiles and they are pretty basic profiles, but there's a lot of information missing. So make sure you're registered on the PFS directory. If you are a member of the PFS, make sure your profile is up to date with the information that is correct about your business and go and complete the missing sections. Whenever we work with a multi-advisor firm, 80% of advisors' profiles have got missing information. So there's a fair chance yours has as well. So that's directory 4. Any questions?
Not on directory 4, but a question for directory 3 has since come through.
Go for it.
So referring to Advisor Book, the question is, how do they make money if it's free?
That's a good question, isn't it? That's a good question. And I'm going to set up a meeting with Advisor Book over the coming months to understand their business model. It was, as I recall, originally started by Ray Adams of Cash Calc fame. And I don't know where Advisor Book are hoping to take it. But it does come back to the point I made on the earlier slide that to promote, for directories to work, it needs traffic, it needs advisor buy-in, it needs consumer buy-in, and you would have thought that therefore at some point it needs to develop an income stream. But other than that, I don't know.
Interestingly, the people in the attendees list are answering that for us. Apparently, when you log in now, you get a notification saying they're going to be charging in 6 months' time.
Fair enough. We shall see what the charging structure looks like then. But clearly they need to create income somehow. Right, we're good to move on now?
We certainly are.
Cool. Number 5. So still on the CII side of the fence, we've got the chartered firm directory. So if you run a chartered financial planning firm, then there is a directory of chartered advisors. A lot of firms who are chartered know about this, quite a few don't. The searches are based on, you can do 2 as a consumer, you can do a postcode search, or you can look up an individual firm's name. There are no filters at that level. The profiles are relatively basic, and it's a free subscription service. In my experience as well, firms have rarely fully completed their profile. The website link is often missing. Telephone number I've seen missing. And also they've introduced categories of advice. So retirement, investment, etc. And often they're missing as well. So if you run a chartered firm, congratulations for being chartered. It's no mean feat. But if you run a chartered firm, go and check your profile. Go and have a look at the missing sections. And again, Abby will put the link in. If you want to go and look now, just Google CII Chartered Firm Directory, put your firm name in, put your postcode in. Look at what your profile is like. Look at what your peers and competitors is doing and check for any missing sections and go and update them. So that's a Chartered Firm Directory on our tour of these smaller, lesser known directories. Dan, any comments on that one?
No, nothing for that.
Right, flipping over to the CISI. So the CISI Wayfinder directory. So again, this is a directory. We talked before about the two directories on the kind of CII side of the fence, were individual individual advisors and chartered firms. Well, this is a directory of certified financial planners and accredited financial planning firms in one directory. It's free. So if you are certified or accredited, you are going to be on there. It looks really good. They redesigned it, I think it was last year, and it looks lovely. The design is incredibly engaging. It looks good. Profiles, in my view, seem pretty well completed. I'm not sure how they've been completed, whether they did a very good job of getting individual planners and planning firms to do it themselves, or they've pulled information from elsewhere. The profiles seem pretty well completed. I've seen a few formatting errors, and you might actually want to just go and check on your profile that you're happy with what it says about your firm. Maybe update some of those descriptions, check formatting and contact details. But the Wayfinder directory, again, if you are a member of the CISI at firm level or individual advisor level, then you should go and check your profile. And that's part of the message with all this stuff. Yeah, use this webinar as a catalyst for going to check which directories you are on and make sure the information is as up to date as possible. Right, poll time, last poll. Dan, can you launch the final poll before we talk about directory number 7?
I can, yeah. Give me a second to find said poll. There we go. Right. There we go. Poll has been launched. So,
are you aware of the Money Helper directory? Are you aware of the Money Helper directory? Yes, no, or other? I'm not entirely sure why I put other in there. It's a fairly binary question. Are you aware of the Money Helper directory? Yes or no? But feel free to answer other if you like. How are we getting on, Dan? Is it working?
It certainly is, yeah.
While people are voting, any questions about the Wayfinder directory?
Nothing specifically for Wayfinder. I do have a few general questions that I will sweep up for the end.
Yeah, we'll mop those up at the end if that's okay.
Yeah. Okay, seems to have majority of the answers in, and nobody has voted other.
That's pleasing.
64% no, 36% yes.
That's really interesting. That's really interesting because when we're writing marketing strategies for the firms that we work with, a large proportion of them never heard about the Money Helper and are not on that directory. So that really is interesting that it's about, what, 2/3, Dan, that have said no, not aware of it?
Yeah, it's varying between 36, 64 and around that. A few stragglers coming through. So far, no one has voted other, just to be that funny one in the group. So I'll end the poll before they can.
So the Money Helper Retirement Advisor Directory is, for want of a better description, government-led directory. It's a directory of firms, not individual advisors, but firms. To be listed on there is free. No cost for being listed on there. You've got to tick 3 boxes. You've got to be FCA regulated. Probably shouldn't trouble too many people on this call. I think everybody's FCA regulated. You've got to give retirement advice. Again, probably shouldn't trouble everybody. And you've got to be whole of market. So if you tick those 3 boxes, you can be on there. Money Helper directory gets traffic from Guidance sessions that they run, you'll be aware of the guidance sessions that are run. Google searches and providers push traffic to it as well. From a consumer perspective, we've got a postcode search, a range of filters, and the profiles are reasonably detailed. As we've seen, many firms haven't registered. I think it's probably fair to assume if you've not heard about it, in the 60%, you haven't registered. So go and register your firm on there. Again, Abby will put the link in to the follow-up mailer, so you can go and do that. Other profiles are incomplete and not up to date. And as I said, it's free. There's no cost for being on there. So our advice is go and register. You absolutely have nothing to lose. If you are already on Money Helper, then go and check and update your profile. And just remember on this point I've made a few times about checking and updating your profile. Remember, these directories will appear in many respects in Google searches for your business. Might be towards the bottom of page 1, even on page 2. But if a link appears in a Google search for your individual name or your business, then someone could click it, someone could go and visit it. And do you want them to see a nicely completed profile with up-to-date information? Or do you want them to see incomplete information and things that aren't up to date? It's clearly the first route. So therefore, just make sure that you go and check all these directories, because if a consumer, if a prospect can click a link in a Google search, they will. We need to give them a good experience. So Dan, any questions about Money Helper?
Yes, we've got a question in from Duncan. It's got 2 question marks and 2 exclamation marks. Duncan really wants the answer to this, Phil, so no pressure. Duncan asks, how do you edit your Money Helper entry?
That's a very good question. As I understand it, you log into the back end and then go and edit it. But I'm assuming, Duncan, there is a reason why that is not necessarily working for you. So I might need a little bit more information. But it looks to me when you register, you put a username and password in, but I could be wrong there.
Okay, so while Duncan gets some more context for that, we do have a comment from Jill who mentions they've received inquiries leading to business from the Money Helper directory. And Joseph mentions, personally, I think providers need to be better at directing the public to Money Helper rather than unbiased, which is often erroneously positioned as a government directory by some providers.
Interesting perspective. I think talking to other planning firms who are on Money Helper, they would concur with that point, that actually lead volumes aren't massive. This is definitely a satellite directory, but is worth being on there. But actually the quality is very good, because a lot of people are going for guidance sessions, etc.
Interesting comment from Claire, who mentions we are on there, but we don't appear in the search.
Right. In that case, I would be messaging Money Helper and saying, can you help? Yeah. Why are we not appearing in the search? After you've done the normal checks that the postcodes match and that sort of stuff.
And then finally, a question from Mia, who just wants some clarification. So you can't be on Money Helper if you are a restricted advisor. That's
my understanding. Put it slightly differently, you've got to be whole of market. That's the language they use on the website. You've got to be whole of market. And when we were preparing for this webinar, I did answer the 3 questions that you'll see on the registration page. And I put no to whole of market, and it wouldn't let me progress to the next step. Right, shall we move on?
Yes, please.
Right, directories 8 through 11. So very aware that the directories we've spoken about so far, a relatively large proportion of people here will be able to go on, will be able to add their firm to. So for example, Money Helper, anybody who's independent, or let's use whole of market because that's the language Money Helper use, can go on to that website. These though, these final 4, I just want to make sure people are aware of them. So Solar have a directory, CIFA have a directory, and Resolution have a directory. Now, clearly these are smaller because the addressable audience is smaller. But if you are a Solar member, CIFA member, or Resolution, it's back to that same advice that I gave before. Check whether you are on there And if you're not, make sure you are. And if you are on there, check your links are up to date, the profile is fully completed, and the information that is being displayed on there is again up to date. Now, again, advisors who are planners who are members of Solar, CIFA and Resolution, you may have already known this directory exists. You might have forgotten and not updated it for a while, and things change. So if you're a member of those three organizations, do go and check your listing. The last one, Boring Money. So Boring Money is a new, relatively new directory. I think it's got massive potential. Looks very different to a lot of the directories we've spoken about before. It allows financial coaches to go on the directory. So if you've got any financial coaches on this call, non-reg financial coaches, you can go on there. Profiles look good. It is predicated on user-generated content. So advisors and people on the directory get asked questions, you go and leave replies, people like your replies. It's got a more community social feel about it. But it does require input from an ongoing commitment to answering questions, etc. So big fan of Boring Money, and we'll be doing a bit more about what Boring Money are doing later on this year. But a big fan of what they're doing, and the directory looks really good. Go and have a look at it, and as soon as you see it, it just looks different to the others, even just from the images that people use. Feels far more personal, I think is what I'm trying to say there. So if you're a member of Solar, CIFA, Resolution, go and make sure you're on the directories. Make sure your profiles are up to date and the information is current. Go and have a look at Boring Money and you see if you think that's for you. So we're going to do quick fire mistakes, and then we'll come to any final questions and comments from people, Dan, if that's okay.
Yeah.
So 6 directory mistakes that people make in our experience. The first, as we've said earlier, is believing unbiased and vouched for are the same thing. They are absolutely not the same thing. Yeah. For reasons we've spoken about before. For me, unbiased utility is around lead generation. Vouched for's utility is primarily around social proof. And some of the comments that Dan read out earlier heartened me, makes me feel that that message is getting through. Second, judging unbiased on the opinions of others, not your own evidence. So for me, too often there's a bit of a pile-on with unbiased, yeah, based on people's gut feel. And I do get it to a degree, but base your opinions on unbiased, based on evidence. So number of leads coming in, amount paid out, calculate the return on investment. And I see a few advisors doing that, which is a good thing. Don't see as many doing it as they should. So just make sure you're judging unbiased based on evidence. As I said earlier, not completing or updating profile listings. Some firms don't know they're on directories and therefore never think to check or never know to check that the directories are up to date. Some firms have built a really nice listing, but it was some time ago and therefore forgotten to update it. So just go and check, click all the links that we'll give you later on today when we pass the recording to you. Go and check your profiles and spot any gaps. Let me know if you find some gaps. Really interested to see whether this hypothesis plays out in reality. Go and update your links. Go and update any missing information. Last 3 before we take some questions. Linking your website out to unbiased. Now, I see this more often than we should. On some advisors' websites, we see a link from their website to unbiased. So you've worked hard to get somebody onto your website. Ideally, you then want them to take a call to action, etc. You've worked hard to get someone on your website. But then you link them out to a directory of 28,000, I think that's the number, 28,000 peers and competitors. I cannot think of a logical reason why you would do that. Plus, if they get in touch via unbiased, you've got to pay for the lead. And they were on your website 5 minutes ago. So for me, I can't think of a logical reason why you would link from your website out to your unbiased profile. Yeah. Just don't do it. Number 5, incorrectly displaying vouched for reviews. So vouched for provide a really lovely set of widgets. There's a bit of code that allows you to embed those widgets into your website, both for individual advisors and the firm. Then when somebody who's on your website clicks the widget, a little pop-up comes up. They're still in your domain. It works really, really well. But some advisors still insist on linking out to vouched for. So linking out, the consumer will go from the website to vouched for, to the individual page. There's only one click then away from seeing a list of other advisors in your area. Again, why do it? You've worked hard to get people onto your website. Don't do it. Use the vouched for widget code. And then lastly, not monitoring return on investment. I think we've spoken about that a lot already. You need to monitor your return on investment from these directories. From unbiased, that's relatively straightforward. For any other directories you pay for, that's relatively straightforward. Providing you record accurately every single new prospect, every single new lead, every single new inquiry that comes into your business. No exceptions. This is a marketing hill that we will die on here at Yardstick, that every single inquiry into your business needs to be recorded. To help you, we have an inquiry recording template. Again, Abby, if you stick a link to that in the follow-up notes as well. So those are 6 common directory mistakes that we see. Right, if you want to stay in touch with me, there's the Yardstick website, my LinkedIn profile. Always happy to accept a LinkedIn connection request. If you've got any questions or feedback after this session, drop me an email. And if you want to follow us on Twitter for some marketing hints and tips, there you go. But that's what I wanted to say today. Got plenty of time. I have. Other people might need to shoot off at 11, but I'm very happy to stick around afterwards. Dan, shall we do some questions?
Yes. So first thing, you'll be thrilled to know, Phil, that Jill has successfully avoided mistake number 2 and number 6 by saying that we check where we receive all of our inquiries from, and we are in credit to date with Unbiased. So,
Nice one.
Right, some questions. So Paul asked a little while ago where they can find metrics around how many clients / potential clients use each of these directories.
Really good question. I guess what we'd have to do is go to each of those directories and ask for information about search volumes. I feel a blog coming on that one. Abby, shall we stick that on our blog list? We could send a little the same questions out to each of the directories and see who respond. Yeah, that'll be a really interesting blog. Thank you for the inspiration. We'll do that over the next month or 2.
Thanks. Right, where should we go next? Anonymous attendee questions. I always like these. They sound so mysterious, don't they? So anonymous person number 1 says, as a one-person company, is Google alone okay then? Because I'm the company and also the individual advisor.
No, I don't. I'd still say not, because we've still got that logic. For me, that inescapable logic of it's very hard to get Google reviews. I can think of a couple of Google review heroes who are sole practitioner firms. I don't know if Charlie's here from South Devon Financial Planning, or Francis from over in Ireland at Fortitude, who just do a brilliant job at collecting Google reviews, and have got, I think, 55 or so for Charlie and 80 odd for Francis. But it is still got that inescapable logic that it is hard to collect Google reviews, and Charlie and Francis are outliers here. So from that logic, let's give people those 2 links, those 2 options, so we're not sending prospects or clients down a dead end. And also, there's no guarantee that somebody will search for your firm. They might search for your individual name. And when they search for your firm, Google reviews come up. When they search for your individual John Smith name, your voucher reviews come up. So no, I still think the logic is to use both platforms.
Brilliant. For anybody that missed it in the chat thread, Charlie mentions that Advisor Book will be £10 plus VAT per month. in 6 months' time when they start charging. So keep an eye on that. In terms of other questions, another anonymous one. What can you do on Vouched For or Google if you get spam or unfair reviews? Can you take them down or challenge them?
So unfair is a subjective point. Yeah. You could have a client and advisor both go through the same journey together, but have different views on the fairness of the outcome. So I think it's hard when it comes to fairness. When it comes to fake reviews, you can appeal to Google as a form you can complete. And most firms that I see who get a fake Google review are able to get the Google review to come down. You can also leave a reply to the Google review while you're going through that process. And we often see replies, we've checked our files, can't find somebody by this name, etc. From a Vouched For perspective, Vouched For is clearly a much smaller organization than Google. So if you get a fake review, relatively straightforward to prove to Vouched For that the person who has left the review or is purported to be the person who's a client is not a client and therefore is easier to sort out. So I've seen firms sort those issues out with Vouched For much quicker. The other thing with Vouched For, of course, before you accept it, you don't see what the review says, but you do see the person's name. So it's less, fake reviews are far less of a problem on Vouched For. They're not that much of a problem on Google. Don't see it very often. In terms of fairness, though, that's a subjective point.
Okay, let's go to Benjamin's question next. So Benjamin asks, what are your thoughts on LinkedIn recommendations? Could it be a third link in an email alongside Vouched For and Google?
It could. I might come to Abby about this in a second and get Abby's view. It could. I wonder whether, I think there's two things there. First, for me, is that becoming a bit overkill? Are we asking for too much from clients? In my experience, one email with 2 links works fine. I don't have much experience, if any, of one email, 3 links. So that's the first thing I'm thinking of. The second thing I'm thinking of is how easy are those reviews to then use in your wider marketing? So Google, it's pretty straightforward to embed Google reviews on your website, for example, very straightforward to embed Vouched For reviews. So they would be the 2 things that I would be thinking. But Abby is the LinkedIn queen. You got any thoughts on that, Abby?
Yeah, I would agree. I think unless your Vouched For profile and Google My Business profile is looking incredible, you can't possibly get a single more review on there. I don't know if getting a LinkedIn recommendation is entirely necessary. They feature so far down in your LinkedIn profile. If a prospect gets all the way down there, they're probably pretty keen on you anyway. So that would be, yes, I think that would be my point.
Okay, right. Let's go to Jack's question next. So Jack says, as a small firm of 5 advisors, we've agreed collectively to go all in on Google to enhance leads to the firm, as opposed to using it for advisors individually. In your opinion, if you could only do one, would you keep Google and driving firm leads, or would you scrap Google and get everyone to get a Vouched For profile and push client reviews to that?
Okay. So first thing, I wouldn't just pick only one. For me, as I said earlier, it's not binary. It absolutely isn't binary. There is, for me, an inescapable logic that we've formed over years of research to use 2 platforms. However, if for any reason, can't think of what it would be, but if for any reason you only wanted to promote one at a time, I would maybe have a period of time collecting Google reviews and a period of time collecting Vouched For reviews. But I just think it's the wrong way to go about things. I can think of firms where they've got 5, 6 advisors that have now got 400 reviews on Vouched For and maybe 50, 60, 70 on Google. And they've been following our processes. Kickoff project, boosters, top-ups, one email, 2 links. Just for me, the logic is it's always 2 platforms. If there's a cost issue, I kind of accept that, although Vouch4 should wash its face. For me, though, it's use 2 platforms. Sorry, Jack, might not be the answer you want, but it's an honest answer, if nothing else.
Yeah, thanks for that. Right, Joseph is still here, so let's ask Joseph's question next. Do you recommend using the standard Vouch4 automated email or an email from the firm with links to Vouch4 and Google?
I think there's various ways of doing it. We've seen firms have success both ways. I've also seen firms have success with WhatsApp messages, where they've maybe sent the first email request out, then followed up with a WhatsApp message. I've seen that works. I think you've got to play around with different things and see what works for your firm.
Okay. In from Chloe. Chloe asks, how often would you recommend to send Google requests out to clients?
So it will be in the definitive guide that Abby's going to get a lot of traffic, that definitive guide today. So in the definitive guide, we talk about the fact that you do a boost, initial project where you email out all clients and say, these are the 2 review platforms that we use, 2 links, 1 email. Then that will give you an influx of reviews. You then need to keep those topped up. Both Google's algorithm and Vouch4's algorithm is partly based on recency of reviews, so you need to keep those reviews topped up. And what we see work is the advisor have a conversation with the client at the end of the annual review meeting or the 6-monthly review meeting or the forward planning meeting, whatever you call it. Just check that the client is happy to receive a request for a review. And then a follow-up email goes out or a follow-up message goes out. Here are the links. So booster project, annual reviews. At each of the annual reviews, advisor asks whether we can send the email. If the client says yes, then the email gets sent out. Only you will know in your firm whether that email should be sent by the advisor or someone in a more supportive admin role. And the answer to that question is whoever's going to guarantee to get it done. In some firms, we see advisors are very reliable and get it done. In others, we see they've got a lot of other things on and therefore they might be less likely to do it.
Right, I count 3 more questions. Do we have time for those, Phil?
Yeah, of course, let's do those.
Lovely stuff. Let's go to Sarah's question next. And Sarah asks, I find clients are reluctant to do Google reviews as they're not anonymous. Any ways around this?
They could set up a Google account under a pseudonym. That's probably quite a lot of hassle for them. And you're absolutely right. This is one of the reasons why Google reviews are relatively hard to get. They're incredibly important, but they are hard to get. You've got to have that Gmail account. In practice, you've got to. In practice, it's probably going to leave your name, and that makes them hard to get. So unless they're going to set up an anonymous account, that's why we have that inescapable logic of having 2 platforms.
Okay, let's go to a question from Ross next then. And Ross asks, what's your view on the SEO benefits of being on these directories?
I think it's... So if we're assuming Google's not a directory, okay, there's SEO benefit from having Google reviews. I think it's marginal. Yeah. I think from a brand perspective, it helps to pack out that Google search results page to make sure that page is all about your business and you're dominating that page. But from a financial advisor near me, financial planner Nottingham, that sort of SEO perspective, it's negligible if 0. Doesn't mean you should be on them, and it's a wider conversation about SEO that might be another webinar. But the direct response, in my experience, is practically 0.
Okay. Right, I lied, Phil. I said 3, but there's actually 4. So it feels like a lock-in, doesn't it? Look at that. We're here till all the questions are answered. So Jack's got a follow-up to their question. Okay, thank you. Sorry for banging the drum on this, but this is helpful. Would you think clients then, if given an email with links to both Vouched For and Google, would opt to leave the Vouched For review?
Yes, they're more likely to do that. Yeah, and that comes back to that point I said earlier. And I've got literally dozens of KPI dashboards for firms that we work with that show a row for the number of Google reviews and a row for the number of voucher reviews. And hence my point, for every one Google review you get, you'll get 5 to 10 of voucher.
Okay, and then this is really the last question. So from Duncan about Money Helper again. So Duncan says, Money Helper, on the default setting, is it more advantageous to opt for advice face-to-face than remotely? So is there a difference there in terms of settings?
It's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. I would play around with it, do a search based on your local area, toggle on and off the remote versus face-to-face, maybe see what your peers and competitors are doing locally. So I'd have a look at that. Ask people, ask advisors, if you're on any forums, whether it's Phil Calvert's Live Talk forum, go and ask a few questions. I don't know the answer to that. And I was always told when I don't know the answer to something, say so.
Okay, well, there ends our questions and our comments.
Fantastic. Thank you, Dan. I think you've worked harder today than on any other webinar that we have ever done, with 3 polls, umpteen chat messages and Q&A. So thank you for that.
I like it. I think we've got the crowd to thank for that. I like an engaged bunch. It always makes for a better hour, doesn't it?
It does, absolutely. Thank you, Abby, for your help. You have the small matter of putting together a follow-up with about 30 different links in there. Hope you've all found value in today's webinar. Hope it was useful. Do go and start checking your profiles. Do go and start adding those profiles in where you're not already on there, updating links, adding information in. We'll see you next month, everybody. Cheers. Bye-bye.
Take care, guys. Bye.